All right, here we go. Episode 12 of the Lucas Grandsire podcast. Like I always say, it's the most creative name in the MMA space. Very excited about this guest today. It's actually our second UFC commentator to come on the show. Shout out to Brendan Fitzgerald, but it is the one and only, the man brewed for the fighting spirit, Jon Anik. What's going on, sir? How are you?
Good to be with you, Lucas. This man's a professional. I got to be on my toes today.
Oh, yeah. So well, it's good. It's good to hear. When you're 23 years old, the word professional isn't always thrown your way. It's like, who's this child talking to fighters, talking to Jon Anik?
So what were you born, like 1997, 1998?
97. I like I like to push it back as much as I can so people associate me more with the 90s. But yeah, there's nothing you can do about that age to make me seem older at this point.
But no, it's good, man. I mean, you're well on your way. 1997, the year I graduated high school. So if that doesn't date me, I don't know what will. But it's good to be with you, man. I think a lot of us are just jonesing to get back on the road after a few weeks at home and just to chop it up about this great sport, obviously.
For sure. I know last time we talked, I believe it was March, April, stuff like that. We were still getting everything figured out, right? With the, just with the quarantine, with the UFC figuring out where they were going to put on the fights and stuff. How have things been for you? I mean, I haven't heard too much about Florida, but, how's the situation been?
Well, I mean, in terms of COVID-19, there are obviously varying degrees of respect for the virus. But 2 days ago, we had 31,000 new cases in Florida. So things have never been worse as far as the virus is concerned down here. Professionally speaking, it was as challenging a year as I've had, more nights away from the family than ever before. And, at least in that regard, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'm leaving for 19 days on January 9th, and it kind of is what it is. It's the longest I will have been gone from my family. But it's kind of the way it goes with the quarantine in Vegas and the quarantine in Abu Dhabi and everything that comes with the travel. But I think like anything in life, you become conditioned to things you do a lot. So I'm very conditioned to wearing a mask at this point. On an airplane, I kind of feel naked if I'm not wearing it right now. Right. So it is what it is. And thankful to be working in a climate that has a lot of play-by-play guys on the sidelines.
It's crazy how used to the mask you get, right? Like you mentioned feeling naked. Like I'll watch a movie and there'll be crowds of people and no one has a mask. And it's like, what the hell are you guys doing? And then it's like, oh yeah, that's when things were regular like today, but it's definitely weird seeing people without masks. Like you feel like, what are you doing? Like you're just going to go out there without a face condom? Like you're going to risk it like that?
I'm telling you, I feel like I need to go get a mask right now. I'm sitting in my house by myself,
Or we saw, Curtis Blades did that interview with Aaron Bronstetter with a mask on, and the joke was like, you're not going to get COVID through Skype. And then he got COVID days later, and everybody had to be like, nah, it wasn't through Skype. Like, it's not my fault.
Yeah, right.
But listen, last time we had Brendan Fitzgerald on, the big question was, how do you guys do it with the bathroom breaks, right? Because we see you guys, you're broadcasting, 5-6 hours and stuff, and people don't give you guys enough credit because that's a grind right there. But what's your personal, strategy for the bathroom break? Are you a Gatorade bottle under the table, or you have some a little bit more elaborate planned out?
Well, I wish it was 5 or 6 hours. It's usually north of 7 on a headset for us. And there are times, Lucas, where I won't get a bathroom break. So I don't drink a lot. I'll sip an energy drink and obviously water and tea and coffee. Those are really the 4 drinks that I would go between. But it stands to reason that I won't get a break. And when you're doing the pay-per-views, there's no commercials. I'm reading promos that serve as commercials. So I don't piss during the pay-per-view. It's a little bit different in the UFC Apex right now. It's a lot easier, obviously, without fans. You can just run to the pisser and come back real quick. But I know for a lot of guys like Al Michaels and guys in a broadcast booth, you can have an empty gallon and just relieve yourself that way. But no, we have all the fans behind us or the crew behind us. Like, you ain't pulling out your Johnson and peeing under the table. I guess if you're Brendan Fitzgerald, maybe you go under the table and you're comfortable. No, I'm just kidding. But that's my guy right there. That's my guy right there. Hopefully he won't be offended if he hears that. But no, it's an inconvenience that you just become conditioned to like anything else. But when I go do the post-fight show after the pay-per-views, that's the only thing I ask for is just let me take a after 7 hours and then I'll go do the post-show.
Because I feel like after a while, though, you'd start to get a little antsy, right? You're calling these fights and your voice would start shaking. It's like, why is Jon dancing from the table? And it's like, look, man, if something doesn't happen, like we're about to have a real problem here on the broadcast.
Well, I will tell you, because you opened up this can of worms, like if I got to the point where I thought it would adversely affect my ability to capstone a fight or call a fight, I would figure out a way to miss a fight or walk. Because oftentimes what the fighters will do, they'll piggyback on a commercial break. The analysts we'll
Yeah.
be able to, use a walkout and a commercial break to have a nice long bathroom break, right? And I'm not afforded those. But yeah, worst case scenario, you miss a fight or walk, and you relieve yourself so you can actually come back and do the job.
Exactly. I could just imagine like the seeing you just run during the broadcast. Like, what is Jon Anik doing? It's like, no, focus on the walkout. Don't focus on me. I got stuff to do.
Yeah, Rogan's got this walk.
Yeah, exactly. I am curious about though Joe Rogan. Like, I feel like everyone wants to know who these big personalities are behind the scenes and stuff like that. Obviously, I'd be very surprised if you told everyone right now like Joe Rogan's a huge dick, like in person. But how is it interacting with him? Is he the way he is on the podcast? I think that's what a lot of people assume. Like he's asking you about DMT when you see him and stuff like that.
Such a dick. No, he's great. He's great. I couldn't have more love or respect for that man. And I do think he's the real article. Kind of what you see is what you get. I think there are people out there who have ingested his every word on his podcast for a decade now. So they probably even have a more intimate understanding of him than I do. But I love my conversations with him. And oftentimes we do talk about fighting, but DC and I have a very special friendship, sort of the three of us, and we're texting each other. And I think that only helps your chemistry on the air. And even though I've said before, I think you either have chemistry or you don't, you realize pretty quickly whether or not you have broadcast chemistry with somebody. But certainly if you are engaging each other in the back and wanting to go out to dinner with each other when you don't have to, that's not going to hurt things on the air. And it's also not going to prevent us from having friction on the air if there are disagreements, So it's a very healthy environment, and I hope Joe sticks around forever. There seems to be this segment of the fan base that theorizes that he has 1 foot out the door, and it couldn't be further from the truth. He stays in North America, but I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him stick around for another decade, if not longer,
That is the crazy thing with Joe Rogan, right? I feel like people have reached that point where they almost don't want him anymore, and it's like they're like, oh, you're too big for us because of podcasting. But he's one of the OGs, right? Like when you think some of the big highlights, you're thinking guys like Joe Rogan and stuff like that. And it does feel like you mentioned like people are trying to push him out when in reality it's like I think people are maybe expecting too much out of the commentary. I don't know. It just feels like there's this storyline being built, almost like because he's doing this podcast, like he shouldn't be commentating because he doesn't love us or something like that.
No, I think it just has to do with the way COVID-19 has affected the schedule. So there aren't as many domestic pay-per-views. So we're doing pay-per-views, obviously, in either Vegas or Abu Dhabi. And, UFC 253 and UFC 254 and UFC 251 were massive shows that unfortunately he wasn't there with us for. So I think that affects the narrative that people think, oh man, he's missing all these big shows and maybe he's got 1 foot out the door. We have a lot of talented commentators, but it certainly feels bigger and better for my money when he's there. And I hope he sticks around for a long time. I just think he adds an element and a flavor to the broadcast that can't really be duplicated. But yeah, I mean, I do think that for any of us, it's hard to have like major gaps in the schedule, and I think the big challenge for him is the way it fell in 2020. You go 12 weeks without calling a fight. It's not ideal, but he's a stud, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him stick around even longer than me, if I'm being honest.
I saw something. Well, I'm seeing more and more of this on social media. I feel like you've sort of reached this point where people they appreciate you a lot more, right? I feel like I'm seeing a ton of love for Jon Anik. People are calling you the commentary goat and stuff like that. All good things. Did you notice that sort of shift from it felt like people maybe weren't appreciating you enough, and now I feel like people are giving you that kind of recognition now?
Well, it's been a long time, right? I mean, in October, it'll be 10 years for me, which is fucking insane, right? But yeah, I mean, I think I did notice it maybe more gradually than some other people. But yeah, I appreciate that support and that love. And I feel like you do have to earn it. And I think MMA fans get a bad rap overall in terms of, I don't know whether it's from, other fans or journalists or promoters. Like, I do think it's an educated fan base. And I think sometimes the vocal minority can seem ignorant at times, but I think by and large, it's a fan base whose respect you have to earn. And I feel like I've earned that. And I try to earn that every show. And that's really the way I approach it. And you do enough interviews, Lucas, and I think people get tired of me talking about the preparation and the way I approach the job. But bro, Conor McGregor fighting on January 23rd versus a UFC Fight Pass show headlined by fighters that maybe your listeners haven't heard of. Like, to me, the preparation's unchanged. It really is. Yeah, with the pay-per-view, there's more logistics and formatics, and my Microsoft Word document is 10,000 words, but by and large, man, a lot of it's about preparation. Brian Stan always said it's an open book test. You might as well show up with some fucking notes, and that's the way I approach every show. But I appreciate you saying that. Obviously, I appreciate the love more than I could possibly articulate in this setting.
Well, that's the thing too with the interviewing fighters too. A lot of people, they think like if you interview like a UFC champion, you're doing tons of research, and if you interview like an LFA guy nobody's ever heard of, you're just winging it. But it's like, if you take it seriously enough, you're doing the same amount of prep for both, and you have the same amount of readiness for everything. It's like you said with the shows too. Like you can't just wing it because it's on Fight Pass, and then Conor McGregor, you show up more than ready. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think the worst thing that could happen, right, would be that there would be some obvious circumstance surrounding one of the athletes that gets lost on the commentary team, whether it's a tragic circumstance in a fighter's life or an injury or some part of his or her narrative that we totally miss. And I get worried about that to begin with when I see 15 fights on a card and 30 athletes, right? Like when I'm in a back-to-back situation, 14, 15 fights on a card, I bitched about it to my boss. Like I'm hoping shit doesn't fall through the cracks, right? But when I got 30 athletes in a back-to-back situation, it's not lost on me that could happen. So we take it very seriously. Maybe I take it too seriously for my own good at times, but it's the devil we know. It's the devil I love right now. And, I'm thankful to have this seat, as you well know.
Is there some kind of strategy you have? Because you mentioned it, like, right, if you have 15 fights, like, you might start with the prelims where not a lot of people are watching, but that's where you have the most energy. And then you get to the main event, right, where you might be tired and stuff. But the main event's where you got to show up. Do you have some kind of strategy to make sure you're not slumping it by the time you get to that 15th fight?
Thankfully, adrenaline is a powerful thing, and so is caffeine. But I think Craig Borsari was the guy who hired me with the UFC. And when he first did so, he said, you got to save room in your register as the bigger fights happen. And it's an important thing to have been said to me at the time. But I don't know, man. I have a hard time not just letting it go for the first prelim of the night if there's a finish that dictates that type of reaction. So I really don't hold back. I find it interesting that before COVID-19 intervened, we maybe held back at times because it was so damn quiet in the arena and there were maybe a couple hundred people there. Now, by the end of the night, we're lucky to have 150 people there. So we've had to adjust to that part of things. But I don't know, man. It's an interesting world we live in right now. And obviously there have been some broadcast adjustments because of it. But I don't know, man. I got to let it rip, man. That's just sort of the way I've always done it, but I have those words from Craig in the back of my mind.
Speaking of the big adjustments, I mean, you guys are commentating in an empty arena, which, one of the big things people found out was like the fighters can hear you guys. Like, I forgot which fight it was, but like DC was giving instructions or something like that. And the fighter was like, oh yeah, I just listened to DC and I fixed it. How much does that factor into what you guys are doing commentating wise? Because you have to think like, if you're like, oh, this fighter looks like shit, or obviously you're on the broadcast, you're like, oh, he doesn't quite look like himself. I imagine, behind the scenes, that fighter's like, hey, Jon, what the hell? What was that? Like, I can hear you.
Well, when we were first doing it, maybe Jacksonville, Florida, there was no plexiglass and they heard our every last word. So thankfully, the sound is being sent back in our faces a little bit, but there's residue. I mean, when we punctuate an end of a fight, I mean, it bellows in the bowels of the building. I mean, you can hear it literally. Sound travels, So that part of it is unavoidable. But no, it doesn't change our calls at all. If anything, Lucas, I think we allow some of that corner audio to bleed in, even when our producers don't go to that graphically or otherwise, right? We'll just allow some of that corner audio to come in, and less is more, I think, on a television broadcast anyways. So I think that is something that I've adjusted to, is that I am talking a little bit less and letting that audio bleed in. But beyond that, I can't be thinking about, people being upset with me or those things. I have to stay in my lane and have that tunnel vision and put out the fires after every show.
Well, when you do podcasts like this, because I mean, I assume you have to have like a million requests. Like everyone wants the great Jon Anik on their show and everything. What's the subject or the question you get constantly where after a while it's like, okay, we fucking get it. Is it the 209 tattoo? Would that be fair to say like that's the one every single time, like that has to get mentioned?
I try to have a good attitude about all the media, because certainly there was a time when people weren't reaching out to me, right? So I don't know that there's ever any off-putting question, but certainly you did not bury the lead. Yes, I get asked about the 209 constantly. There was a time in my career where I actually took more pictures with my arm showing people the 209 tattoo than actually my face. Thankfully now I think the pendulum has swung a little bit, and maybe it's about 50-50 face and arm. But yeah, the 209 tattoo for sure. And what I tell people is, Nate Diaz handled it all really well. If you really want to know how I feel about it and how the tattoo originated, I've said it multiple times, right. But my favorite part of it was finally seeing Nate and showing him the tattoo. That was the highlight for me.
I think the crazy thing, like, you mentioned how it started and stuff like that. For a lot of people, including myself, like, we were watching it unfold live, and I remember thinking, like, people do that shit all the time, right? If so-and-so wins, I'll run through the street naked. And I was like, nah, Jon Anik's not going to do it. It's a fun podcast thing. And then sure enough, you put I remember the big post on Instagram. It's like 209. I was like, wow, like he did it. He said it and he did it. And I feel like you got a lot of credit for that, because a lot of people, they say it and then nothing happens.
Well, I wanted the tattoo, and people can believe that or otherwise. So the bet was sort of an excuse to have tattoo action on the line. If you listen to what I said on the podcast, I said I might get the tattoo anyway. And once it registered with Nate during fight week and he's taking the podium and saying, Jon Anik better get a motherfucking tattoo or whatever, like I was getting that tattoo win or lose. So obviously it made for a better story when he actually won the fight. But it is not the first tattoo bet I have done on the Anik and Florian podcast. It will not be the last tattoo bet that I do. I want that Game Bread tattoo on the neck. So maybe we'll raise the stakes for his next fight or something. But yeah, it was a fun bit for sure, but it was plenty more than that, and I'm not going to Stockton, California, Lucas, anytime soon, but I think I'd be welcome within the confines by this point.
At some point you have to. Or I think even 209, like, I know in my job we do a lot of deliveries, and if 209 is on the house, like, I'll be up there, I'll be like, 209, motherfucker. And then, the person I'm working with is like, what are you talking about? It's like, you don't get it. But 209, like, it's never going to be, fighter weighs in at 209. You're going to be like, Stockton, motherfucker. Like, you have to anytime you see 209.
You should actually, if you're a light heavyweight, if you're going to miss weight, might as well come in on that 209 number.
Hell yeah, 209. And then when you do the little pose, which I guess you have to look sad if you miss weight, but you got to yell out like, Stockton, motherfucker, Stockton, bitch. Like, you have to.
Yeah, Stockton, CA, whatever. Yeah, I'm with you.
When you said the Game Bread tattoo on the neck, why the neck? Like, 209, it's kind of hidden, but there's no hiding Game Bread like on the side of your face like that.
No, and for my career, certainly I could have a makeup artist, wipe it out every show, but I'm not looking to do that, getting your neck fucking airbrushed before every show. So no, I mean, if I did something else for a living, I don't know. I've always kind of liked neck tattoos, but no, I would get the Game Bread fonted somewhere else. I don't know where. Maybe on the other arm across from the 209 or the inside of the arm up here. But George Masvidal and I have actually talked about he's got to get his touched up, and we're both in South Florida. So when he goes to get his touched up, you can tell him when you have him on your show that I'm going to go get mine done in the same exact font. But yes, it won't be on my neck.
I feel like everyone's trying to get you to do a tattoo challenge. And if you listen to everyone, you'd be like tatted up everywhere. Like they'd get you every single fight. There'd be something like so-and-so wins. Like you're going to be full of like phone numbers all over you just from all the area codes.
Yeah, well, I want to do the FE for Frankie Edgar, that little element symbol for iron. I mean, I got a lot of ideas, and a lot of the tattoos obviously are multiple meaning and have legitimate meaning to me, right? Like the 209, historic, Nick Diaz was my favorite fighter for years, was the impetus for sort of me becoming a rabid mixed martial arts guy, so there was a whole backdrop to that. And obviously Masvidal and I, have a history that goes back to 2009 Bellator season 1. Game Bread was sort of a historic call that I made. There's a lot of layers to the tattoos. People think I'm just a fucking idiot, doing a 209 tattoo bet on a podcast. It's like, I have a wife, right? I mean, Ken Flo thought I was crazy when I called him and told him I was going to do it, but it is what it is, my man. No regrets. That's for goddamn sure.
You mentioned the wife. Did you have to run the 209 thing by her? Like, did you have a whole elaborate sales pitch, or was it just kind of like, oh, by the way, this is happening?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, well, she knew that I like numbers and wanted a tattoo. And, like Ludacris, I like area codes, right? So I just, I don't know. It wasn't a hard sales pitch. I mean, she thinks I'm crazy anyway, as does Kenny Florian, right? I think a lot of us broadcasters, a lot of people in the public eye kind of feel perpetually misunderstood. But, I'm not this perfect cookie cutter guy, like, I don't know. I got a little crazy in me and wanted to do it. I knew there was a great chance I was getting the tattoo. It wasn't like it was some minus 500 Conor McGregor favorite. So thankfully, yeah, she wasn't totally opposed, but she thinks I'm certifiably nuts.
I think one of my favorite things that happened, I think it was this year, there was like a video released of you where you were, I think you were practicing or something. You were like, and I've got this fucking producer in my ear. And everyone went crazy because they're like, oh my God, Jon Anik said fucking. Like people thought you were some kind of Sage Northcutt, right? I've got this frick producer in my ear. Like, nah. And then I remember seeing the mentions. You were like, Anik and Florian podcast. Anik and Florian. Like, if you watch this, you know that me saying that isn't that crazy.
Well, and it was a video for Michael Bisping's social media. I mean, I guess this is breaking news on your podcast, right? People thought that I was actually addressing an ESPN camera, and Lappy, our producer, is one of my dear friends. He did nothing wrong. I was just trying to give Michael Bisping some damn content for his IG, and Dominic Cruz didn't understand what Bisping and I were doing, so his reaction that clip into something that it wasn't. But thankfully, I didn't get the text from the boss. So dodged another bullet there, Lucas.
What was the reaction online though? Because I assume like when you look and then you realize like, oh, they're not in on the joke. They think I'm talking about this fucking producer. Like I assume people must have gone pretty crazy seeing Jon Anik insulting the big producer at ESPN.
Right. Yeah. No, people thought it was something that it definitely was not. But I've tried to scale back the cussing a little bit. Obviously, I don't swear on the air when I'm working for the UFC, and knock on some wood, I haven't had a situation yet. But, I grew up in Massachusetts where we swore a lot. And when my dad moved out when I was 13 or 14 or whatever it was, all bets were off. And I don't know. I've tried to scale it back for my mother and my wife on the podcast, but it's hard for me. That's sort of the way I talk. I mean, you'd be disgusted listening to me and my twin brother talk, right? It's every other word is a swear.
Well, that's the thing too. People think like you have this image, but it's like if you saw people like with their boys or like with you with your twin brother and stuff, you'd be like, who is that guy, right? Because people imagine Jon Anik is gonna, if you meet him in real life, like, hello, drink Modelo, how are you doing? You know what I mean? But in reality, it's like that's sort of a kind of a professional, like kind of a character you put on a tiny bit with the way you do things, but then the way you are behind the scenes, like people don't expect that.
Yeah, and I also think there's a certain professionalism that just comes with that play-by-play seat, and there's a certain standard, and I try to uphold that and do my thing and let my personality bleed in when I think there's an opportunity to do so. And that's obviously been a gradual thing as well. It's like, as I've said before, it's not like Dana's like dying to hear more of me than Rogan, right? So pick my spots. But I do think that part of the public approval rating for me maybe going up a little bit is because I've allowed more of myself to come out on the broadcast. And, it's not just earning the respect of the fans, but earning the trust and the respect of my bosses and the executives to allow myself to sort of be out there a little bit more. So it's a constant evolution, man. We've never had a perfect show, and unfortunately, we never will.
This big thing I'm seeing online now, well, a big thing, this sort of Jon Anik meme I'm seeing where people are associating you heavily with Modelo. They think you're some kind of Modelo guy trying to sell it to people.
We get the sponsorship, Lucas. Can we get the second sponsorship?
Nah, but the big thing I saw is the memes, like they'll post a picture of you angry and they'll be like, when someone chooses a beer other than Modelo, brute for those of the fighting spirit. Have you been seeing those memes?
Oh my gosh, everywhere. I mean, mostly show up in my phone before I see them on social media because a lot of people quick trigger with the texts. But yeah, I see it all, and it's all great. It's all fun. It's fun for my kids, and I mean, my family makes fun of me with that look on my face, obviously, and I mean, I'm the laughing stock of this family, that's for sure. But it's all good. It's all good.
But I think people imagine you're at home just pounding Modelos and eating only P3s and stuff like that. Is that accurate? Can you take us behind the scenes? And is that the typical Jon Anik snack?
No, I mean, hey, if Lucas Grandsire wants to get me that Modelo sponsorship, we'll start fucking pounding those on camera. But no, I don't have Modelo or P3 in the house right now. But I don't know. Maybe you're onto something.
I think the people would be disappointed. Like they imagine you've got this big chess piece, Modelo, brute for those of the fighting spirit, and P3 on the neck. Like it's funny that people like you're doing your job, right? It's a UFC sponsor, and people assume Jon Anik is this big Modelo guy who's going to try to sell it to you if you meet him on the street.
Well, it's funny you say that. I mean, I wonder at the end of a telecast, and I've said this to our producers, like, dude, like scale of 1 to 10, how sick of hearing me say brewed for those with a fighting spirit are you at this point in time? Or EA Sports UFC 4.
Yeah.
God love all of our sponsors, right? But I do think at the end of the night, right, I become synonymous with those phrases and those sponsors because we're not throwing a commercial, right? So you might hear me drop a Modelo 25, 30 times in a night. And thankfully, somebody's got to do it, right? I mean, somebody's got to do it. And eventually the bosses will get sick of my voice and somebody else will do it. But for now, it's my inconvenient truth.
I think one of the ones that made me laugh just because it was so funny to me was when you were doing the unhinged promos, because it was like we'd be in the middle of the thing, you'd be like, unhinged, are you unhinged? I
Yeah.
thought that was so fun. I don't know why. Like the first time I heard it, I bust out laughing because I was like, what? Like who came up with that sense? Like I know it's not you. Like, all right, guys, how are we gonna bring up the unhinged on the broadcast? But I thought it was so funny just hearing you say it like that.
I want to get a t-shirt that just says unhinged.
Yeah.
Undeterred, but maybe unhinged is better.
Yeah, I mean, how do you know like when to say that? Do you have some kind of card that tells you like, hey, at this point, like tell people they're unhinged or bruise a Modelo or something? Like, how do you know when
So
it's time to
you
say that?
really want to know, it is an exhaustive process, right? I get promotional copy for certain things, and then I write copy for other things. But it ends up being a massive Microsoft Word document that might be 125, 150 script cards, 10,000 words. But as far as when to do it, I have producers, 3 of whom shift shows, and they all advise me when to sort of say things. Some will give me a little bit more freedom, like get this in and we'll follow you type deal. But it's up to me to get them out there as quickly and as cleanly as possible. I try to read those things as quickly and as effectively as humanly possible, because oftentimes the copy is pretty long, and our sport isn't like baseball where there's time between pitches, right? So sometimes I'll have to bail on a promo, and thankfully the truck is pretty nice to me when I'm forced to do so.
So the big thing we saw that, I mean, I don't know how new it is. I don't remember when it started, but it's the 3-man booths, right? Like they have DC, Rogan, yourself, stuff like that. It's got to be pretty challenging for you, right? The 3-man thing, because obviously like you have to pick your spots when you have that many people that are, on the broadcast talking.
Yeah, it's a different beast for sure. It's actually a totally different job than a 2-man booth, if I'm being honest, because 90% of the time when I'm in a 2-man booth, I'm doing the post-fight interviews as well. So there's a lot of pivots and a lot of things that go into that type of broadcast. But yeah, if you think about just in terms of the inventory, right? Let's say you want 10% of your broadcast to be silence. Then there's 90% of the inventory. In a 2-man booth, maybe it's 45% for each of us, right? In a 3-man booth, all of a sudden, those percentages get sliced up. And for me, I really want to allow the analysts to have as much real estate as humanly possible to shine and explain what's going on. And sometimes that means that the guys in those seats need to ping pong and go back and forth, and I need to shut the fuck up for 90 seconds or 2 minutes, right? So I am more than willing to check my ego. I do not get paid per word. I don't feel the need to prove myself and cause traffic jams. My whole thing is just I hate traffic jams. I hate when 2 people are talking at the same time. And so sometimes if I need to take on a different role in a 3-man booth, I'm happy to do so. But I also think over the course of 13 fights, there are times where guys' energy is going to wane, and my job is to have my energy never wane. And so there might be a pocket in the broadcast where those guys are laying out a little bit and they want to see the action, and then I carry things for a while. So no broadcast is the same, and none are perfect,
Before we wrap up here, though, you're going to Fight Island, and I've talked to, coaches, fighters, stuff that are going on there, which they say it's a cool experience, but the thing people don't realize is it's quite boring. Like there's nothing to do when you're not, working and stuff like that, especially for you, because you're not cutting weight, you're not training, all that stuff, unless, of course, we're wrong. But what does your stay at Fight Island kind of look like for you, to avoid, going crazy when you're not working?
Work nonstop. I mean, bro, it's disgusting how much work goes into these shows. And I'm doing 6 shows, right? I'm doing, pre and post and calling the fights for the pay-per-view. And then I'm doing the January 16th show on ABC. And then I will do pre and post, I believe, for the show on January 20th. So gosh, man, I get anxiety just thinking about it. I'm one of the few guys who actually benefits from a mandatory 48-hour quarantine, because I will, I'll work out in my room and do whatever I need to do to sort of pass the time. But like, I won't be watching Netflix, I'll watch the National Football League if the schedule aligns, but I'll be prepping, man. I can make good use of all the time. And yeah, we'll be riding bikes at 4:00 in the morning to try to stay on US time. So there's some navigations when it comes to the time zone, but I don't know. I feel very comfortable over there. It's a weird intoxication with this W Hotel on Yaz Island, man. It just makes you want to go back. So I'm excited to go back, and obviously excited to see, Connor make that walk for the first time in a long time.
All right, before we officially end the podcast, though, you have a podcast yourself, social media, stuff like that. I'm sure you have things you want to shout out, plug, all that stuff. Now would be the time.
Well, thanks, man. At Anik Florian Pod, if you want to follow the podcast. We have a YouTube channel for the Anik and Florian podcast. We are taping usually Sundays or Mondays, so that show's been weekly for about 5 years. And my personal page, JON_ANIK on Instagram and Twitter. And that's about it, man. I'm not too good at those personal plugs. I'm used to just saying Modelo and P3.
There we go. Well, thank you for coming on, Jon. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. Great to be with you.